today's webinar is about, and that is to initiate mechanisms and relationships and means for making sure that the disabled community, disabled persons, are not impotent bystanders in our society, but are full participants. So we are aiming for technology-mediated accessibility that makes possible participation by all disabled individuals. So our objectives for today is that the presenters will discuss how recipients can not only make their services accessible, but encourage full participation of individuals with disabilities. This is a true aim on the part of the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program. You'll recall that in your applications there was a section on how you were going to make your projects accessible. Well, this webinar we hope to provide, as you can see, the federal regulations that apply, strategies for making websites more accessible, and resources that are available to make services more accessible. So in saying so, our agenda for today is that to provide an introduction. We will take care of some housekeeping issues, and we will have sessions, as you can see on the agenda, Disability 101 training, website accessibility, a session from Communication Services for the Deaf, for deaf and hard of hearing, and a question and answer period. Now, all of this is definitely BTOP oriented. Our presenters for today, Gwen Weaver, my colleague and Federal Program Officer, also is taking part in this with us, and she will chime in during questions. Laura Trond, we're very pleased and excited to have Laura take part in this webinar, first webinar with us. She is the Senior Disability Policy Analyst for the U.S. Department of Commerce, Office of Civil Rights. And today is just the beginning of several sessions with Laura for working with us to make sure that what we do is not simply ADA compliant, but that we are on the forefront of accessibility equaling participation. John Myers is with one of the BTOP projects, and it is our pleasure to have him. He is with Accessible Technology Coalition, which is a part of the Center for Accessible Technology, and I might add they have an absolutely marvelous website full of wonderful resources. And Kevin Barber, Vice President Project Endeavor, which is the BTOP project that is being handled by and implemented by and conducted by Communication Service for the Deaf, Inc., and it is a nationwide project. Now, just a few housekeeping chores. We will have a section in our session for you to ask questions. You will be able to ask them verbally, but at any time during this webinar you have a question or a comment, you can just type it into the text box. Keep the questions coming. We really want this to be as participatory as possible, because this is not just simply us presenting to you. This is a chance for us to begin a dialogue between and among ourselves on this topic. The presentation, transcription, the questions and answers, and a video recording will all be available after the webinar on the site that you see there on the screen. So this is just the beginning, and we hope to have your full participation with us today and in coming sessions. I'd like at this time to turn the webinar over to Kevin Barber from CSD, that is short for Communication Service for the Deaf, to discuss this webinar's technology and resources. Kevin, please.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. This is Kevin, and I am speaking through a live interpreter that's here in the same room with me. That is one example of how we're using communication access or interpreters in this webinar. Now, with VRI, you're seeing an interpreter on screen. This is an interpreter in South Dakota, and they've connected to us via video to provide access to this webinar. CART is real-time captioning, which is another example of access we provide, and this is captioning. This is for people that may have hearing loss. Typically, maybe it's elderly people later in life, they've lost their hearing, or non-signers. They rely on captioning versus sign language. And so our goal is to meet everyone's needs as best we can. So talking about on-site interpreter, that's the person that's actually voicing for me that you're listening to right now. That is the most ideal situation for a deaf presenter, is to have someone live, but if that's not available, then we have video. And this is where an interpreter can be provided or can be accessed through video, and we can provide same language for the presenter as well as the interpreter. So that way, we have access provided that way. That's the ideal situation. So that's where we're at. Okay. Next slide. All right. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, thank you. You might say this is a first for us, and I think it's really a breakthrough for BTOP. We might be late to the table because, as I said in the beginning, like so many people, we don't really understand what it means to provide access or to be in compliance with ADA, or what it means to make things accessible. We put it in our grant requirements, and we do what we think is the proper thing for making things accessible. But I think our BTOP projects are making us more sensitive, and we are coming to learn more as we work with our grantees in terms of understanding and learning and being more responsive. So as we move through this, what we want to do now is just show you some questions, a poll that we're going to be taking so that we can get a sense of our audience, so that the presenters who are coming up will have a better sense of who they are speaking to. First is pretty clear-cut. There will be 4 questions. We can look at the next 2. And what will happen is when the poll comes up, you will be given about 20 seconds to respond, but at the time the poll comes up on the screen, that will be all that you see. You won't see the interpreter, and you won't see the captioning. But immediately after that poll, then you will have those resources again. Once we get through these 4 quick poll questions, we will move right into the rest of the presentations. So I'd like to start now with the very first poll, please. So we want you to describe the categories of disabilities that you know you are serving through your program. So select all that apply. You can select 1, 2, or all of them. And I promise not to vote. Okay, it's very interesting. 81% of you say that you know that you're serving individuals who are blind and with low vision. 50% are serving individuals with low capacity. So let's go to the next one. To what extent does your program serve to what extent do you serve individuals with disabilities? So what do you provide for them? All right. So 47 say you have accessible computer software. 23% don't know what level you provide. And only 12% specifically target individuals with disabilities. How confident do you personally feel in providing direct assistance? We find this an interesting question and an important one, because we don't always show evidence of our lack of confidence or whatever our level of discomfort might be. So somewhat, 45%. And only 13% feel quite confident in terms of providing direct assistance. And that would be expected. And I think we have one last question. So not much at all, actually. 23% say not at all. 7% monthly, 14% every 6 months, and 19% weekly. 37% say you're not quite sure how frequently. And that is what I think has surfaced in many of my conversations with Kevin and his colleagues with Communication Services for the Deaf. Service for the Deaf. I'd like at this point now to turn the presentation over to Laura Tranche to tell us a bit about federal regulations that apply to grant recipients.
Well, thank you, Francine. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Francine, for having me and inviting me today. I am so thrilled that we're actually having this type of conversation that is so vitally important. So, I guess I thought I had to have control. Do I have control of my slides? Perfect. So let's talk about the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That's the act that governs the federal government. And basically what it says is that we will provide reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. That also includes anyone that we contract with. If you do science and research or any type of business where you're contracting with another contractor, they too should make sure that they are in fact compliant with the ADA, AAA. And we'll talk about what that means later on in the presentation. But most private industry knows ADA, where the federal government understands the Rehabilitation Act, because that's what governs us. We have to meet the standards of the ADA, but the Rehabilitation Act is the one that says that we will make sure that everyone has a fair and equitable working environment. So for today, we're really just going to talk about the Section 504 and 508 of the Rehabilitation Act that really pertain to this discussion. 504 basically says we will provide benefits just like everybody else can. So in this particular webinar, as you can see, we've made sure that not only a presenter who is deaf has an interpreter, but that whatever is discussed is also being done both visually and captioned-wise, which is really unique, and I applaud the coordinators for doing this because it's really a great visual so everybody can understand that everybody gets to participate in this discussion. But we have to make it just like everybody else can. So if I get to participate and I get to speak, so should everybody else, regardless of their disability or what other special needs that they may have. 508 basically says that we will provide all electronic devices discussions like this particular webinar, and I keep referring to that, but that's exactly, I mean, this is a classic example of what it means to make sure that we are accessible. But that includes our websites, that we make sure that people can read your PDFs that you're sending, or if you're having a conversation, that the email should be able to be read. If the person needs whatever to make sure that that happens. Video phones for conversations, things like that. And we also want to make sure that everybody has equal access to our websites and things that information that we're putting out there. An example, Department of Commerce's secretary. You know, when they first came out with the weekly broadcasts or whatever that you see about what the week ahead is or what happened last week or all those type of things, we want to make sure that everybody has equal access to that and that everybody can fully understand what is going on in their environment and their work environment. And 508 does that through very specific standards to make sure that all of our devices, all of our websites, all of our webinar technology, all of those things have a certain standard that they have to make sure is there for everybody to participate. If you ever, Access Board, we actually sit on the Access Board, the Office of Civil Rights, as our CFO, Scott Quayle, is actually the board member. I just happen to sit in for him as the liaison. But this is where really the nuts and bolts and the standards come into play. This is where they decide, in for example, Section 508 for electronic accessibility, what the standard is. I'll give you a prime example. The big push right now is iPhones, and those new, they're wonderful phones, right? Because they're great for people who are deaf. They're great for ordinary people, but the problem is that for a blind person, they're horrible because there's no tactile, right? So if you think about all the things that we do on a regular basis, some things are just not accessible for others. And we need to look at it from a different perspective. That's why you hear a lot of talk right now in the federal government about diversity and inclusion, because everybody's coming from a different viewpoint and a different look about how things are. So it's very important that we bring those folks to the table to say, well, what do you think about the iPhone? What's bad about it? Right? What's good about it? How can we improve it? So that's what the Access Board does. They send out the experts to find out, okay, what are we doing, and how can we make it better, and how can we make it more inclusive? And actually folks sit down and they try to test it out. And then we develop guidance or laws or regulations that ensure that companies follow these guidelines when they are either designing things or putting up a website or sending a PDF so that it's inclusive for everyone to sit down at the table so that you can have diversity and you can have a different view of thought, so that everyone has an even playing field. So we hear a lot of talk about the ADA, and those are the standards that the federal government has to reach. So if, in fact, we have to make sure that it's inclusive for everyone, the standard will be there to make sure that that happens. And then it becomes the Rehab Acts that the federal government falls under, that if we aren't and if we don't make things accessible, then there are other avenues that individual can do, such as filing complaints or class actions or those type of things, so that we ensure that everybody has a level playing ground to grow and thrive in their work environment. And sometimes that's not very easy because some of the standards are a little bit, used to be very high. So it wasn't exactly easy for folks who with disabilities to actually say, this isn't right, this isn't accessible, I need help with this. So what the ADA Amendments Act did, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Amendment Act, it opened the door. And what it did was it enabled it became more inclusive, but it enabled a lot of other people to bring to the table to say, my restroom really should be accessible, and it's not. Or, my lunchroom isn't, I can't use it because of this isn't right, this isn't up to standard, this isn't up to code. So we're very happy about, the people in the disability community is very happy with when the ADA AA came out, because it made it more accessible for everyone. And the standard that the federal government has to reach now is so much more inclusive that it will include everybody. And that's really what it's about, because everybody will tell you that if you are to succeed in business, you need to bring diversity, not just diversity of color, but diversity of thought, diversity of abilities, diversity of perspectives, because everybody, has their grandma sitting there right at the table. So, and their grandma are very different throughout the, world, or it depends on what situation you were in. So, I think I'm getting on a rabbit trail here, but so the federal government and the Department of Commerce takes this very seriously. We are to provide accommodations for everyone, and we want to make sure that everyone has that same level playing ground so that they can thrive in their work environment. And what that means is that we are responsible to provide reasonable accommodations to everyone who needs them. And we treat them special. This is the special pass that, if I or anyone else gets to go to the restroom by themselves, so should everybody else, right? So it's very important that we look at things from a different perspective, and we make sure that we include people from a different perspective. And it's imperative that the federal government, Department of Commerce, provides reasonable accommodation, unless, of course, there's undue hardship or a direct threat. And those are pretty high standards to meet. And, of course, we don't even talk about money or those type of things because it's not even the question at this point. So if anybody doesn't have any questions, I want to thank you all. And I forget who the next – do I turn it back to you, Francine?
We will Laura's information is there for you to make note of. And we thank you very much for providing the information and being a resource to us. It's very important that we work together in this fashion. So now we do have question break. Are there any questions regarding federal regulations about accessibility? You can type those in, or we can take a question or so right now if anyone has a pressing question that they'd like answered.
And if you do want to ask an audio question, please press star 1. You'll be prompted to record your name. To withdraw your request, please press star 2.
Gwen, are there any questions that have been sent to us through the... Okay. Thank you. Let's see here. 2 questions. Let's see if I can read this. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
All right. Someone says, I am reading and seeing this, but not getting audio through the computer. I don't know what this is. A technical question, Mike? Do I need to? Okay.
I need to take care of it.
All right. He said he's taking care of that. Thank you. Okay. Someone makes a comment here. I am having a hard time reading the question. So, Mike, if you could read it carefully, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. We had a comment from Deborah Sosha, just mentioning that the iPhone and the iPad have apps for blind and visually impaired users, and that her organization uses them quite successfully. So that's something I suppose to keep in mind.
Oh, I do see. Greg Luke says that the text appearing is quite accurate and quick. Is it automatically producing the text based on a voice-to-text tool? If so, it seems remarkably accurate.
No, this is actually Polly Fife, who's our wonderful captionist. Obviously, she does a great job.
Rose Ann Evans, do all programs have to have accessibility? Or do we just have to make it available? Laura, you have a comment on that?
I think
federally funded programs.
I'm sorry?
I would presume this refers to federal programs. Do all federally funded programs have to have accessibility? Or do we just have to, or do we use them all the time? Or do they have, is it a requirement for federally funded programs to have accessibility?
Yes. The quick answer is yes. But it also depends on who the audience is as well. But if we were having something in the auditorium, for example, like our office is doing one tomorrow, we make sure that there's an interpreter there. We make sure that it's accessible, all those type of things. Now, if a person in a wheelchair doesn't show up, we still have to make sure that it's accessible.
Do people have to do they have to make an advance notice or announcement, or is it incumbent upon all programs to make sure that the audience or participants knows that accessibility will be made available for them?
Well, typically in the announcement it should state that if someone should need accessibility stuff, that they are to contact a certain point of contact. But it's incumbent upon the individual to ask for certain things. Like someone should not ask for accessibility to a building or those type of. It should be assumed that is going to be accessible.
Okay. All right, then. Thank you. We will come back to questions later. Why don't we turn this over to John Myers, Center for Accessible Technology.
Hello, everyone. As Francine said, I am with the Center for Accessible Technology. We're a nonprofit based in Berkeley, California, and our mission is to help connect people with disabilities with technology that will allow them to do their everyday things, such as work or access entertainment or information. So we work with individuals with disabilities on matching them up with the right technology and software and hardware solutions, and then also with organizations to help make their technology more accessible to people with disabilities. And our project through BTOP is essentially taking what we do and putting it online so that we can reach many more people. And you can check that out at the Accessible Technology Coalition, which is atcoalition.org. And there's lots of resources there for both organizations and individuals who want to learn more about accessible technology. What I'm going to talk about today is website accessibility. Laura gave a great overview of Section 508, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that actually means in a practical sense for you and your organization. And I don't seem to have control of my slides. Mike or anyone, can I advance the slides? Okay. So the first question here is, well, why does web accessibility matter? It's important for several reasons. One is that so much of our information and communication with our clients, if you're an agency, is moving online. So we will often have people call us and say, well, I'm trying to get information about this place, but they keep telling me to go to their website. And in many places, that's the only way to get information. So as that becomes more of a central place for communicating and putting critical information, it's imperative that it be accessible. Also, we're dealing with something that when you make a website more accessible for people with disabilities, you almost always make it more usable for all of your visitors. So regardless of the legal requirements or the desire to do the right thing for people with disabilities, you often serve all of your visitors better by making your website more accessible. And thirdly, this is the Internet is one of the few places where many people with disabilities can interact with other people without having their disability be the first thing that somebody notices about them. So the Internet really has the power to be a great equalizer for people with disabilities, but the flip side of that is that it also has the ability to be yet another barrier. And so I'm going to talk about today, with the few minutes that we have, web accessibility basics, some common user situations that people will face when they try to access your content, and then some ways to think about, how do you approach this for your own site. So for web accessibility basics, these are the sort of major tenets. One is to provide equal access. That's the whole goal here. So similar to how you provide equal access in a physical space, we want to provide equal access on our digital space. And a lot of that depends on allowing flexibility of presentation. So it used to be, 10 years ago that people viewed the web as sort of a digital version of print materials. So you would get them all designed nicely and then you would put them up on the web. But really the benefit of the web is that people can manipulate how they're actually looking at that information. So that can mean they're looking at it on a big desktop computer or a small mobile device. It can also mean that they're looking at it with or without a mouse, or they're using a screen reader program because they're blind. So thinking about your web content as something that's not necessarily going to appear to the person on the other end the same way it appears to you is a good start for how to think about this. Obviously, following the accepted standards and guidelines are an important part of this. Laura referred to Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. There's also the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, and those are more of an international guideline that's used by many other governments around the world. But one of the most important things you can do is try to understand how people with disabilities are actually accessing the web. That gives you both a better understanding of some of the guidelines and standards you might read, but it also helps you adapt as web technologies change, because the web technology changes much, much faster than the guidelines and standards. So if you can get people in to your office and say, try to sign up for our e-newsletter and just watch what happens, you'll get a much better appreciation for what it's like to browse the web with a disability and browse your site in particular than you can by attending 1,000 webinars and reading 1,000 articles. So I highly recommend that. Okay, so let's talk about some common user situations. One is keyboard-only users. So these are people who are not using a mouse for whatever reason. Coincidentally, this also overlaps with people on mobile devices, so there's a huge benefit to making your site keyboard accessible. Blind users who typically are using a screen reader to access web content or to access any computer content. And a screen reader is basically a software program you can install on your computer that will output the contents of your screen in an accessible manner. And for most people who are blind, that means a synthesized voice. Some are using a refreshable braille display, which is essentially a flat board with braille dots that move up and down. And then there are deaf and hard of hearing users, which you'll hear a lot more about in a few minutes. Low vision users, and then there's many, many others. So we don't have time today to talk about every disability type, but people with cognitive or learning disabilities, mobility impairments, or people using speech-to-text are just a few of the others. So for keyboard-only users, primarily you're using your tab and enter keys to navigate websites. And the primary barriers that you'll come across if you're a keyboard-only user are things that absolutely require mouse interaction. So if you have content on your website that you can only see if you move a mouse to a certain spot, that's going to be a problem. And then the other really common one is an excessive amount of time to actually get through pages. And I'll show you an example of that. This is a screenshot of the New York Times website from a couple of months ago. And I've outlined in red here a few sections. Number 1 is across the top, which is some main navigation items. Number 2 is their search box and Facebook and Twitter links and how to subscribe and all that. Number 3 is the sidebar, which goes way down the left-hand side of the page. And then after that is the actual news articles. So the main headline here is Germans back the bailout fund as rifts persist in Euro talks. If you actually wanted to click on that link, which is the first news article on the home page, you have to tab through all of these things in number 1, 2, 3. So all the top things and all the links on the left-hand side, which and at the time that we looked at this, it was 84 clicks just to get to the first link on the page. And you can imagine if you're doing that on every page that you view, the time it takes to actually get through web pages is immense. For blind users, as I said, they're usually using screen reader software. And it's important to remember that blind users are also keyboard-only users. So the same things apply to blind users. The primary barriers that blind users are going to face are images and other non-text content, so things like charts, videos, multimedia, inaccessible forms. So if you have a contact form or something like that, it's often difficult for a blind user to tell which information goes in which field if they're not labeled correctly. Inaccessible PDFs are a big issue for blind users. Poor page structure, which has nothing to do with the visual layout of the page, but actually the underlying code, which allows screen reader users to sort of jump around the page to the main blocks of content the same way a sighted person would visually scan a page to find what they actually want to read or interact with. And then non-descriptive links, which don't make sense out of context, and audio or video that starts automatically. Again, if you're relying on audio output to access all of the content on the page, having a video that starts playing automatically with audio creates a bunch of conflicting audio, and then it's impossible to figure out how to turn off the audio. And here's a screenshot of the IRS homepage, again from a little while ago, so they may have fixed this by now, but as you can see at the top they have these 3 big things, which are the primary services people are usually doing. One says, I need to file my tax return. One says, I need to pay my tax bill. The other says, I've got a question, which is great because they're prominent, they're easy to see. The problem is they're images, and they have no text equivalent coded into them. So a blind user is not going to get any of that content. And if you don't see the content, it's actually very difficult to find those links in other places on the IRS site. So here's an example of images that are inaccessible, which could be made quite accessible just by providing a text equivalent, which is very easy to do. For deaf and hard of hearing users, may seem obvious, but the big barrier is audio-only content. And these are usually videos that don't have captioning or transcripts. You'll get different opinions on this depending on which deaf and hard of hearing users you talk to, but many people prefer, if you have to choose between captioning and transcripts, for instance, based on resources or you have time constraints, you need to get something posted to your website very quickly for legal reasons, and you have to choose between captioning and transcripts. Many people would prefer captioning because you can watch a video and read the captioning at the same time. It's very difficult to read a transcript and watch a video at the same time. And then same for audio. If you have interviews or other audio-only content without transcripts, that content is going to be totally inaccessible to deaf and hard of hearing users. And you're going to hear more about that in our next presenter. Here's an example just of a screenshot of a YouTube video of President Obama giving a speech on the jobs bill from back in October. And YouTube actually provides many tools for doing captioning. So if if you have a concern that you have lots of video content and you're worried about the resources it takes to caption them, there are many, many tools out there that can help you create caption files. So don't let that deter you. Low vision users are another sort of big group of people. This encompasses many different situations. So from people who have had low vision from the start of their life and have never been able to see without aids, to seniors who are sort of having natural vision loss as a result of their age. The way we define it at our agency is low vision users are people who are not using screen reader software. So they're not relying on speech output. They're still using their eyes to interact, but they're often using other assistive technologies such as screen magnification. And the big barriers here are low contrast text. So text where the foreground, the color of the text against the background creates low contrast. You'll see lots of gray on white text and gray on black sorts of text in newer websites. It's a real fad right now. Unfortunately, it's quite inaccessible for many people with low vision. You also see lots of small text. You'll see instructions or information conveyed solely through color, such as, the required fields are marked in red. That's a common one. If you can't see red, then you have no idea which fields are required. And then content that disappears when enlarged. So if you increase the text size on your computer, oftentimes on websites, text will start to disappear or overlap with other text and become unreadable. And here's an example of a really common color contrast issue. This is a screenshot of a simple email form where you enter your email address and your zip code, and you click a button to learn more, and it signs you up for their email newsletter. The problem is that the text that says email address and the text that says zip code is extremely light gray on a white background. Many people aren't even going to see that, and therefore they have no idea which information should go in which field, or in fact even that this is an email sign-up form. And so this is an easy one to fix by just increasing the color contrast on your site. Here's examples of small text. These are unreadable, so if you're not seeing the screen, don't worry about it. But these are examples from a California government website, a top 50 online retailer, and one of the biggest banks in the world. So if this presentation is making you feel like you have a lot of work to do on your website's accessibility, don't feel alone, because many of the organizations that have the resources far beyond yours and should be doing this already are also not doing what they should be. And here's just an example of how color can be used to convey information only. This is a screenshot of a Facebook feed, and I've taken out the color, so all you see is gray, black, and white. And it's fairly impossible to tell what's a link and what's not in here, because nothing is underlined, the links aren't underlined, there's nothing to distinguish them. And if you try and guess, I'll give you a hint, there's 3 links in this image. I bet you can guess 2 of them, but the third one is probably a surprise. And here it is with the color. So like and comment are links, which makes sense because those are actions. But of the 3 names listed, Colin Pethram and then Judy Bailey is listed twice. Only one of those names is a link, and there's really no way to distinguish that unless you can see color. Now you're probably thinking, well, what about my site? And if you're like most organizations out there, you're probably thinking, gee, we have some of these issues going on our site. I can pretty much guarantee you, even if you've spent time working on the accessibility of your site, that you do have some barriers. But the upside is you can probably make large improvements with a really modest amount of effort. And that's what we spend a lot of our time helping organizations do, prioritize problem areas and make the biggest improvements that they can. And there are some ways you can get a basic sense of the accessibility on your site. One is checking out if you can navigate it with the keyboard only. So unplug your keyboard, unplug your mouse, and use your tab and enter keys and see if you can do everything on your site that you would want visitors to be able to do. You can look and see if the color contrast and text size look reasonable. There are tools and consultants out there that will help you, but a good initial thing to do is just think about, could your mother or grandmother read this, or would they be straining a little bit? If they'd be straining a little bit, then it probably could be improved. Do your videos have captions and transcripts? And does the site rely on being able to distinguish colors? And again, this is just a sort of overview of a couple of top issues. There are also lots of other smaller details that we could do in a follow-up session. And I'll just leave you with this quote that I like, which is from Scott Rains, and it says, what if the first question we ask was, what is so unique about this situation that it justifies exclusion, instead of how much does it cost to make it accessible? And I want to congratulate the organizers here for taking that to heart and providing an accessible interface here for the webinar itself. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. We truly appreciate that. Is there a rationale for black background and white text for your presentation?
Well, it's extremely high contrast, as you might guess. And also we find just for all users, we tend to, remove logos and other things that people probably know about us if they're already attending one of our presentations, and remove all the distracting stuff and just focus on text and images.
I think we'll take that to heart. Are there any questions at this time about making websites more accessible for John?
If you do have a question, please press star 1 and record your name. Again, please press star 1.
Well, it doesn't look like any questions are forthcoming at this time. Maybe later. Please, we really would like to have you ask your questions. If you're hesitant to press star 1 and ask them vocally, then please type them in, and one of us here will be able to read your question and pose it to the appropriate presenter.
And Francine, sorry, I didn't include my contact information there, but we can definitely include it in the wiki or the follow-up materials, and if people have questions about web accessibility, they can contact me directly after the session.
We do have 2 questions that just came through. One moment, please. Teresa, your line is now open.
Hi. I submitted my question through chat, and I guess you might not be noticing it. I'm wondering if we don't have screen reader software ourselves, can we tab through a web page as you demonstrated to see how complicated it would be for those users?
Tabbing through a web page is a great way to get a sense of what a keyboard-only user would face, a sighted keyboard-only user. It's not a great way to get a sense of what a screen reader user would experience, because you're still seeing the screen, so you know what you're trying to get to. However, I think it was 50 or 60% of you know that you are serving people who are blind or low vision, so the best thing you can do is invite someone in who is a screen reader user and have sit with them while they test your website. And that will give you a much more authentic experience than even if you did have screen reader software installed, you're not going to be browsing in the same way that an actual daily screen reader user would.
Okay, thank you.
I show no further questions.
Did you say is there one more question?
No, there's not.
All right, then. If there are no more questions at this time, we'd like to...
Excuse me, Fran, this is Gwen. I can now see the questions. I see there is one more question there.
Wonderful. Go right ahead, Gwen.
Yeah. Is that the one from Luis, I believe, which says, does the AT Coalition website have information about website accessibility?
That's a great question. Actually, it does not. But our our organizational website has lots, and that is theforat.org.
Okay, and then right behind that one, there's another question that says, is there an online service that will evaluate our website?
There are some automated tools and checkers you can use. Some of them are good for getting a basic sense of some of the bigger problems you have. Fortunately, I think this is a human issue and not a technical one. So we're dealing with how to actually make content accessible for people, not for machines, and that involves a fair amount of manual work. A good example is the text equivalent for an image. An automated checker can check if you've included a text equivalent for an image, but it can't tell you if it's appropriate or not in its context.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other written questions here now.
Okay. In that case, we will move forward. Kevin, would you please give us the presentation on CSD's access for deaf and hard of hearing persons?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And what I'd like to do is introduce you to Mark Zangara. He's our National Resource Specialist and Deaf Advocate here on staff. And I'd like to turn it over to him to begin with, and I'll add to it. So with that, let me introduce you to Mark. Mark.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. We're looking at the idea of what is accessibility. And I really want to applaud and thank Laura and John for setting the groundwork for us. And what Kevin and I want to do is drill down a little bit deeper into what that means for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. Someone brought up the idea of accessibility for a public meeting. And it becomes very tricky because we're looking at the difference of balancing equal access versus functional equivalent. If we have equal access for a public meeting, that means that if Kevin walks in with me, he has the same access to that communication as I do. I'm not a deaf individual. I walk in, I listen to the presenter or the speaker. Kevin's going to rely on a sign language interpreter. Kevin does not always have the luxury of walking into any public meeting knowing that those accommodations will be there. So we're often looking at functional equivalent, which means Kevin needs to pre-plan and does not have the option of just spontaneously participating in things. So we're going to look at it from that standpoint. Accessibility for a deaf and hard of hearing person is not like building a ramp. We've talked about eliminating physical barriers, and ramps generally are going to run $1,500 to $2,000. It's a one-time cost. We put it in, we know that we're accessible for anyone who's not able to navigate stairs. For a deaf individual, every time they come to your conference, to your workshop, or to your website, those accommodations need to be made. And often that's in the form of a sign language interpreter. If you look at our screen right now, you see a working sign language interpreter, and you also see CART, which requires a court stenographer. CART typically runs at about 225 words per minute with, what do we have there? 89.5% accuracy. You're looking at a very small number of court stenographers that are able to produce this. You're looking at the interpreter working at the same time who is working at exactly the same speed. And if you've noticed throughout our presentation, Lisa, who's working now, is switching off with Jamie, another interpreter. It works on physical fatigue and also mental fatigue. Because unlike CART, that's taking spoken English and putting it and translating it into text, you have Lisa and Jamie who are going from spoken English into a totally different language called American Sign Language. So they're navigating between both languages. Oftentimes, it is difficult to have both medium working for your presentation. And what you're going to need to do is it's going to require some pre-planning that we'll talk about in a later slide.
Okay, this is Kevin speaking. For a deaf person, or I should say, deafness is unique in such a way that it's an invisible disability. You could have a room full of people, and you would be hard-pressed to find which ones are actually deaf or hard of hearing. It's almost indistinguishable amongst anyone else in the room. So you almost have to, for example, if you're in a hallway, you wouldn't know that you just passed a deaf person unless you made a point to visit with this person and speak with this person, and you realize quickly that you're having a communication problem, and you have to either gesture, you have to use signs, you may have to use mime even, or write things down, and maybe you may notice they have a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, and that may be a dead giveaway. But otherwise, you would have absolutely no idea that the person is deaf unless you tried to communicate with them. And now deaf and hard of hearing people are used to trying to make accommodations for themselves because they have to adapt to the environment around them. Now, for most deaf and hard of hearing people who have been raised or who have grown up signing, English is their second language. Their primary language is American Sign Language. And so English is something they've learned later through a visual sense. Also, just to let you know that many colleges and universities do offer courses in American Sign Language, and it is the fourth most taken foreign language for credit. Also, it's the fifth most popular used language in the United States, or in high schools, or the other way around. I'm sorry, it should be the other way around. So, and that's what we've found in a lot of our research. So, Mark, would you like to take the next slide?
Next, we'd like to help you welcome a deaf person into your business, your website, or your conference. And we really want to look at doing your homework. It's the idea of knowing what resources are available, having contact with those specific agencies. If I remember correctly from the beginning when we polled the participants, 60% of you either did not know if you served deaf individuals or thought that you didn't. As Kevin just said, deaf people you won't know until you encounter them and engage them. So you actually may be serving deaf or hard of hearing individuals and not know that. So what we'd like to do is propose that you learn what your local resources are. Often that comes in the form of Googling deaf services is a very good way to find out what's in your locale. If you know that you have something coming up, contact your local deaf services or your interpreter referral agency and inquire about their prices. Talk to them about how services are provided and enter into a contract with them so that when that person shows up at your place of business, however they do, you'll be ready to go to bring an interpreter on board for those services. And if you remember, what an interpreter really does is help you do the job that you do even better.
Now, being sensitive to those who are deaf, if you're presented with a deaf person, a lot of times people feel compelled to use paper and pen and to write everything down. If that's available to you, that is one option. Another option is a new device called a UBI Duo or UBI Duo. It's a wonderful tool, and it allows both parties to type back and forth, and the device itself ranges about $2,000, and it allows you to digitally read the entire conversation. And if you had to write manually everything out, sometimes it's difficult to read. You don't understand someone else's penmanship. But by typing on a device like this, it's very easy and it's very convenient. Another thing is signaling devices. A lot of buildings have fire codes, and they have strobe alarms for fire alerting systems, and you know you have an emergency that you have to leave the building. Telephone devices having a strobe light that goes off every time the phone rings helps alert a deaf person know that the phone is ringing, or that maybe someone's at the doorbell, if there's a signaling device for a doorbell. So making things more visually accessible can be very beneficial. And then there's also video phones, and this is a very popular type of device in today's world for those who are signers, deaf people that use sign language. Video allows point-to-point communication through a video phone, and we can sign back and forth to each other in our native language, which is ASL. Or we can use a VRS service, which allows us to contact hearing people via a video service that uses an interpreter. And so in addition to that, there is something called the Public Access Video Phone, or PAV, which is a large device, and it's all-inclusive. It provides a number of different services. It has a built-in video phone. It also has a keyboard that allows you to send email or use IP relay, text-based relay services. It also allows you to make, I believe, a voice call and web chat, web information. All those kinds of things are available in this public video phone. And it is in use in many public places, such as airports, universities, and libraries, and things like this, deaf service agencies, and so forth. Mark?
If we look at conference planning, the first thing we need to do is look at what are the accommodation needs that need to be met. We've talked about a number of different accommodations that are possible. The best thing to do is list in on your registration a box for participants to actually tell you exactly what type of accommodation they're looking for. If you're looking at a deaf and hard of hearing individual, you'll get down to one of two things. They'll either be asking for an interpreter or possibly real-time captioning, which you're seeing here. The other thing that's listed is assistive listening devices, and that would be used for an individual who is hard of hearing and relies on his or her residual hearing to participate. And most of those work off an FM system, which takes the feed from your microphone and transmits it to a loop that they wear around their neck, which then connects to their hearing aids. Those are things that are many of your deaf agencies have, and you possibly could rent those, because those aren't typically things that you're going to want to buy. When you're looking at setting things up with an interpreter, you need to realize that for any assignment that's of any great length of 90 minutes or more, you're going to need a team of interpreters. You may actually even use not only an interpreter, but also what we call a CDI, which is a certified deaf interpreter, which is an individual that has the ability to work in a less formal language that some deaf individuals use. Budget for these accessibility needs. I'll tell you right up front that you'll be confronted with sticker shock. The use and provision of sign language interpreters does not come cheap. if you prepare for it, you fundraise, you build that into your budget, then you have those funds that are accessible. The National Association of the Deaf has a conference every 2 years. I attended it 2 years ago when it was held in Philadelphia. And to make their conference accessible for hearing individuals who came. This is a conference for all deaf people, but there are hearing folks who show up. To make their conference accessible, they spent between $50,000 and $100,000. And that's something that deaf organizations do on a regular basis, knowing that they want to include everyone. Be ready, do your homework.
Okay, let me talk about service accommodations. About 85% of deaf and hard of hearing individuals do tend to use video phones, and that is something that allows them to use their native language or their first language as ASL, and they would much rather use that than any other type of accommodation. And many of our services and our centers, we offer things like TTYs, voice call, web chat. We offer video phone connectivity. We offer fax connectivity. The largest percentage do tend to use video phones because it's so easy to use and it's so comfortable for most deaf people to use because they're able to just sign whatever it is they'd like to know or to inquire about. Mark?
Okay, Kevin and Mark?
Yes.
Could one of you give just a brief account of what communication service for the deaf is, what the organization is?
Oh, sure. Communication Service for the Deaf, or CSD, is a nonprofit organization for deaf and hard of hearing people. It is a nationwide organization, and we do provide a wide variety of services. Primarily, let me break them down into 4 different areas. TRS, or Telecommunication Relay Services, is a telephone-based service that we provide. Those using CapTel or caption telephone is a device that people can use their own voice, but they can't hear what's being said on the other end, so they read what's being used or what's being responded to. And so, and then there's the other way around where maybe they can use a hearing carryover and voice carryover where they can maybe not use their voice, but they can hear. So we do have equipment distribution programs. In the state of California, for example, is one of our largest. There's a call center and a warehouse where we distribute specific pieces of equipment for deaf and hard of hearing people. It could be TTYs or teletype machines. It could be amplified phones and a number of different devices, signaling devices, and so forth. In addition to that, there's also deaf-to-deaf centers that we're looking at, and that's what Project Endeavor's concept is, where you have a deaf agent speaking to a deaf customer, depending on whatever their need is. 85% of our customers that call into our call center use video phones for that direct access. We also provide a totally different service, and that is sign language interpreting. We use qualified and certified interpreters all across the nation. If there's a need for something like that, they can call into our center. And most deaf signers do prefer to have a live interpreter in their assignments or different situations. If that's not something that's available to them, they can use video video remote interpreting. Then there's also a totally different category, human services, where we provide things like job coaching, employment opportunities, independent living skills training, domestic violence counseling and assistance. We have adult basic education programs, just a wide number of human services. And so those are the areas that CSD focuses on in various places across the nation.
Thank you very much. Now to our listeners, are there any questions that you have about working with individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, or any particular questions you have for Kevin or Mark? I'd like for you to be able to ask those questions right now. Type them in or *1.
When would you like me to read the question I'm seeing?
Yes, indeed, please.
Okay, it says, are you saying that we have to make services for the deaf available at each program? Since the needs are so different, can we create special programs just for people that are deaf or hard of hearing and another for sight-impaired persons? That's the first question. Gentlemen? Or anybody, actually. Any of the presenters could probably address that.
Correct.
I think I'll go ahead and take this. This is Laura.
Go ahead.
We need to make sure that it's accessible for everyone. You can't just specifically target one group or the other.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else want to add to that?
This is Mark. I think when it comes to serving deaf individuals, setting up accessible services is great. Oftentimes, if you have a large enough group and you're able to run something that's more tailor-made to a deaf individual, that might work more toward their benefit. If you're running, I've run groups with deaf individuals that allow them to participate with their peers. That allows them to have the same base of knowledge, similar to what Kevin was talking about with our contact center when a deaf person calls in. We have deaf agents here that immediately know the person's language level, they have a common understanding, and they share the same background. So there's two ways to look at it.
This is John Myers. I'll just add one thing. It also depends whether or not you know who's coming. So if you have a conference or event that requires registration in advance, you can certainly ask people if they will require sign language interpretation or assistive listening devices or any other type of accommodation. So for instance, we have an annual awards dinner that we do that we invite people to, and that's one of the questions we ask when they RSVP. So we have had years where we've had sign language interpretation, but we've also had years where we haven't because we had no attendees who needed it. That's much different than if you have a public meeting where people can just show up.
Very good. Thank you. Those are three good answers and shows how complex the question was. We do have another question that's been sent in, and this one is Skype an effective tool for those who are deaf or hard of hearing?
This is Kevin. It really depends on the kind of bandwidth that you're dealing with. I've used Skype several times in the past, and if you have a low-quality computer or low bandwidth capabilities, it causes the connectivity to be very difficult to understand. Now, for text, it may work fine because text doesn't require a lot of bandwidth capability. But for video, you need to have a good, high-quality video computer and video equipment, as well as high, large bandwidth. Then you're going to have much more effective communication.
Thank you. And that's probably the best answer. Thank you.
Are there more questions? Do you have anything else, Glenn?
No, there are no more on the typed list.
And I show no audio questions.
All right, then. What are there any final comments, Laura, John, Kevin? Any of you or any questions any one of you would like to ask the other?
No. Thank you, though, for having us today, Francine. I greatly appreciate it. This is a much-needed discussion.
Well, we would like to thank all of you for your presentations and for collaborating with us to make this make this possible. We'd like for you to visit the wiki and access the presentation and the transcript, as well as other webinars that we've conducted. The BTOP recipient community wiki address is on the next slide. And we'd like for you to send questions or suggestions to us. What suggestions do you have for us in making webinars more user-friendly for persons with disabilities? If any of our participants have some thoughts or suggestions, please email those to either Gwen or myself or both of us. Preferably just send it to both of us. Would you like follow-up webinars on accessibility issues? If you would, please send us suggestions for topics that you'd like to have covered. We really would like to hear from you. We'd like this to be the first in our series of technology-mediated accessibility. Gwen, have you any comments or thoughts to add before we bring a close to today?
My only thought is to say thank you again to the presenters. I thought it was fabulous. And to thank the participants, the attendees, for hanging in there with us.
Absolutely. We thank you all, and have a good evening. I think that will bring a close to this webinar.